What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? So, anyway, it's, I'm here, and tonight is November 7th, 2022. It is the night before election, and let me get a different view. So it's the night before election, and obviously a lot of things are transpiring. Tonight was a good night for me. I actually had the opportunity to take care of my assignments for the University of Arizona, so knocked out those four. Did work. I was actually going to go vote today, but then when I went to the place that I thought I would be voting, realized that was the wrong location, so I ended up mailing my school class books back and coming home, getting into my assignments, knocking those out. One of them was particularly interesting, dealing with ethnic studies and social justice. Obviously, the acronym CRT and BLM have been acronyms that are quite familiar on the national scale here, particularly in the United States of America, since 2016, really, when BLM first became a mainstream social topic. And tonight I was writing a little bit about them. Ethnic studies, obviously dealing with the study of us and how the social dynamics are intertwined in today's popular culture, populism, and the effects. Particularly when we think of ethnic studies, we think about minorities, socially and economically disadvantaged neighborhoods, particularly minorities and Latinos. And then also I was dealing with a little bit of hate crimes. It is no secret, particularly in the minority communities, that there are some rifts between certain ethnic groups. In particular, and I use that word again specifically, I grew up in Hempstead, Long Island, and because of the environment and the atmosphere or the neighborhood that I lived in, I am aware, and I did see stores that were not black owned, technically, black colored, mulatto, however you want to define it. And those stores that were predominantly in my neighborhood were either white owned or Asian owned. So there was always a Chinese restaurant, which you see in many minority neighborhoods. You see a liquor store in many minority neighborhoods. You also see fast food restaurants or quote unquote mom and pop chain restaurants in those neighborhoods. That is not a phenomenon because whether you're on the East Coast or the West Coast, you see pretty much the same thing. I guess that goes into the whole theory behind project building or building psychologists. That would be a different discussion for a different day. Nevertheless, I got into a little bit of that discussion, so I was writing about that. In fact, if I can pull it up, I will share a little bit about what I wrote. I think it was interesting from my own personal experience, and then I believe that one of my classmates, Isaiah, he spoke about his environment that he grew up. He grew up on the West Coast in California, and he did not actually experience some of the things that I experienced on the East Coast. And when I wrote about it, unfortunately, I can't say unfortunately, when he read it, he took it as it was a personal view, and it wasn't necessarily a personal view. It was just my personal feelings of why there is this animosity or this wall between certain ethnic groups and others. In particular, the one ethnic group that stands out is there is some animosity between blacks and Asians. If you recall, within the last couple of years, there has been an Asian hate law that has been signed into law. It was created through legislature. And for those people that have existed in the United States for the past 400 plus years, there has never been a bill so readily and eagerly assigned. You think about from Dred Scott to Sanford, 1857, and then Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, and then Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, and then the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s until today. Why does it take so long to address an issue that is clear, that has been rampant? It has its traces and fabric spread throughout society, in particular for one color group, but immediately upon certain instances or egregious instances of late, our legislature was immediately able to get a hate crime bill passed, particularly for Asians. And when I can only speak about the blacks in the community that I grew up with in, and that was several communities. Because when I first came to New York, I lived in Brooklyn, and then Queens, and then from Queens we moved to Long Island, and for a couple of years, I had the opportunity to attend to a certain affluent school, and then went back to a predominantly black school for my high school years. Nevertheless, I'll tell you a little bit. In fact, I don't think it's much of a read, but I'll tell you what I wrote. And because the question was, how does segregation affect education and society, and particularly its impact upon color groups or those groups that suffer economically, socially, and in education. So I wrote, segregation has been a great distorter of American society. Most people think in terms of black and white mostly. The images of South and slavery conjure a host of feelings on both sides of the equation. It often assumes that whites, being those in superior and inferior relation, would not experience the result of that issue. However, that is far from reality. And I'm just gonna change something real quick. So the main impetus of any society is the relations of individuals, family units, communities, cities, regions, and the country. This is the real fabric that defines the shaping of culture, morals, values, perceptions, and reality. The idea of separate but equal, as laid out by the U.S. Supreme Court in confirming segregation vis-a-vis Dred Scott versus Sandburg, in its majority opinion on Plessy v. Ferguson, is considered to be the beginning of the Jim Crow laws in the South. If we recall, upon the announcement and institution of the Declaration of Independence, black people were freed, but had literally nowhere to go. And so you have an entire demographic that lacks educational, financial, property, health, and government resources. The first of those is the key to addressing all of them. As a sect of society without education, you cannot actively and intelligently participate in society. And think on this, in 1950, 1 in 10 black adults graduated from high school, in contrast to 4 in 10 white counterparts. The real statistics in that number is that 100 years had passed before 1950. In 100 years, which is where black education was, after the slaves were freed, 1 in 10. The lack of education hinders your employment opportunities, which in turn affected your financial literacy, which in turn affected your family relations, which created specific issues that include rampant drug use, crime, and domestic problems. In simplest terms, segregation means poverty. You can resign an entire ethnic group to poverty and all its outcomes. Imagine all the potential for over 100 years that lay dormant in one segment of society that was never realized because it was effectively minimized and isolated for a society at large. What inventions could have happened? How many Nobel Peace Prize winners could have appeared? How many political leaders and educators could have existed? This is part of the legacy of segregation. There are many other points to make, but education was systematically eradicated legally for blacks, and the societal impact is still being felt to this day. To the point of academic achievement, what is the remedy for poor schooling? The number one solution is academic resources, with teachers being the main catalyst for success. Poorly educated schools with undereducated teachers are ripe for low progress. In an article by Huffington Post, it states, it found that black students in segregated schools tended to make smaller gains in reading than their black counterparts in more integrated schools. This held true even when researchers accounted for black students' background. The concentration of poverty has an enormous impact on the educational outcomes of students in economically challenged environments. When you include that with high turnover rates of teachers in these same neighborhoods, you have a recipe for poor performance. This is true for Black and Latino students. And so that was a little bit of what we were speaking about tonight in regards to the impact on segregation throughout history, and particularly it's a legacy in the United States of America, which is still impacting the communities of color in many different regions and many different states. We know in Manhattan, which in the early 1900s, there was the tenements, and we know who lived in those tenements at the time. There were poor European immigrants that lived in them. And then as the years progressed through the century, the 20th century, we find that there was a flip and there was a reverse. So the Europeans that came in poor at that time, now they were in the fire department, they were in construction, they were in law, and so their fortune had escalated, whereas now those tenements became projects, using the term building psychologists, and all that goes into picking a particular area and building structure and how it has an ideological and psychological effect on its inhabitants and those that dwell in that vicinity. And now those became projects which predominantly were populated by people of color. Move that into the 70s, and what do you see in Manhattan? You see drugs, crime, right? Domestic issues from single parent homes, welfare, and the complete reliance upon the government to sustain them. But in retrospect, as you look back 100 years to 150 years to 1850, when Blacks were freed, and the fact that they literally had nowhere to go, and there were these new laws that were created whereby if you were a Black and you were a vagrant and you had no place to go, they could institutionalize you, and thus we see some of that still in the Louisiana penitentiary system. So the idea of segregation had just a tremendous effect, a negative effect upon certain communities, in particularly the communities of color, but also the unintended consequences of all the things that society missed out on because of the individuals that were impacted by poverty, lack of resources, education, lack of health care. All of those individuals that possibly had such potential that they could have changed society and the world in general, those losses remain still because we will never be able to reap the benefits of that. So that's why I say segregation impacts not just those on who it casts its shadow, but also on those who are standing afar off in the distance. All right, so that was some of the conversation that was going on in class, and we were talking about that. I think another point of that was ethnic studies and its impact. But tonight is election eve, and so there are many things that are developing right now. Candidate John Fetterman, who's running for Senate against candidate Oz. If I could get some of that up. What I do know is that there are still remnants of feelings of an election going awry in 2020. There's no need to replay some of the images that we saw of posters not being able to witness certain things involving vote tallying, the Supreme Court rulings, legislatures changing laws in the 12th hour. So a lot of those things became part of a continual fight for the next 2 years, and here we are in 2022, and some of the rhetoric. I can tell you this, one thing that I clearly on one side of the issue is this concept that Black people are stupid, or that we somehow don't have the ability to obtain the basic ID that identifies us so that we can present ourselves at some location to vote is ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. It's demeaning and it's destructive. And it basically says that we're buffoons. I grew up in New York. There is generally, and even here in Texas now, everyone has ID. We need ID to open a bank account. We need ID to facilitate our funds. We need ID to get a driver's license. We need ID to buy furniture from a from Best Buy. We need ID to obtain a credit card. We need ID to enter in social or open area events, concerts, football games, and so forth. And ID is just a basic form of identification in society. And the fact that one particular group of people somehow cannot manage this is ludicrous. It is demeaning. It is wrong, and it reminds you of Jim Crow laws. And the fact that it's being said that because we have to do this, it's reverse Jim Crow laws of discrimination. Blacks don't have an ID. They don't have a problem getting an ID. We don't have a problem voting. What I can tell you, the issue is with most people in the black community is the fact that if you continually voted along a certain path and expected certain things to happen, you get frustrated. You get frustrated. And the history of the political parties and their responses to the plight of Black America, which would say, some people would say the diaspora of Africa in the United States, it's out there. The facts are clear. The facts are clear. So when some of these things come up, in particular that issue right there, I just found it dumbfounded. Why would you even say that? And what makes it worse is the fact that there are other black politicians that champion that cause. Now, I did not live during the 1960s, and I have never been part of the civil rights movement. And in fact, I'm not much into some of the social injustices from that point of view because I have a particular view about life in general. I still believe that one of the greatest statements that the country has is the fact that all men are created equal. And if we were to live up to that statement, then we would not have the need for social justice. We would not have the need for civil rights because each person would see the other person in the light of their full potential of humanity and their quality of an individual, and you would respect that and give them a certain treatment, the treatment that you would, I would hope, want for yourself. And that is all embodied in the statement that God created all men equal. So if we could live up to that standard, then I don't think we would even have some of the conversations that we do have. That being said, that's a whole nother different conversation. So in Western Pennsylvania or in Pennsylvania, you had President Biden, President Trump, and President Obama all out on the campaign trail. In fact, President Trump is in Ohio tonight, I believe, and President Obama is probably home, I think. And President Biden has gone out in the last couple of days. There's been interesting statements. And when people ask me about voting, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute, but we're held liable to the things that we say as politicians on a different scale than your neighbor. You don't hold your neighbor to the same sense of scrutiny when he says something that affects millions of people, but you as a politician, as a representative and a delegate of the people that you represent, you're held to a different standard. That's just the way it is. Is that right or wrong? That's debatable, but the fact that it remains that is the way it is. So President Biden has made some statements that he wanted to cut off coal. Well, this is nothing new, right? Because during the election cycle 2020, he said that he wanted to get off of fossil fuels and they wanted to rapidly transfer or create some initiative, some momentum, and just get straight into green fuels. I don't know. Nevertheless. So there's that. Now, a key race is obviously candidate Fetterman versus candidate Mehmet Oz. And the big debate tonight is the fact that candidate Fetterman has sued in court, stating that he wants to count all ballots, whether they have been messed up ballots or whether they're tainted ballots or whatever. And this is all the residue of what happened in 2020. And if you're not aware of that, then you can always just Google it and go back and just messy. So as a person who has no standing to contest anything in Pennsylvania, this is what I will say. American Idol has 150 million people that watch it. They vote. they count the vote, and they deliver a decision. The United States had 154 million people that voted during the last election. We did not have a winner until December. Millions of people today, right now, are doing banking transactions all across the world. We can keep track of every single action, whether it's true, whether it's illegal action or fraud. And this is all happening simultaneously all across the world. We can keep track of every single phone call that is being made, every single conversation. They can tell you what time you made it, who you, basically almost exactly who you spoke to as far as identifying the number that you were calling, and possibly even voice recognition, the time, the region, and almost a specific location when you triangulate things. Millions of phone calls are happening right now, and we can do that. We can count all that up, and they can literally say how many people are on the phone. Millions of people are watching TV, listening to radio, and they could have a rating about how many homes are tuned into a certain channel at this time. But when it comes to voting, since 2020, there is this issue of we can't find out and we don't know how many votes have been cast, where they're casted from. Wait, there's 20,000, 30,000 that came in. And so this discussion has been going on for the past couple of years. In lieu of candidate Fetterman's suit, the Department of Justice has also decided that it is going to oversee some elections, and particularly certain locations. All of those locations happen to be battleground states. I didn't make this up. This is all from the Department of Justice. So you can see that tomorrow's shaping up to be an interesting day. Needless to say. Now, when it comes to the matter of some of the things that have been said, so President Obama said over the week about the different issues that were on the ballot box. He said decency. He said democracy. And if I were to address democracy, the fact that we are voting says that democracy is well and healthy. If people understand that in the Greek states, there were local democracies where people would actually go to the town forum and they would discuss the issues. However, society is a little bit more complicated than that as it is. Then we do have local representatives that can bring the issues to the constituents and discuss what is on the table and how their constituents see things. And they should be advised by the constituents how they would like them to vote. Does that always happen? No, it does not. The populace in general is uninformed. Because the populace is uninformed, we have things like millions and billions of billions of dollars being given to different projects, gender studies in India, that I believe that the majority of the American people say, why are we doing that? And that's just one instance. And I'm nothing against the people of India, but the point of the matter is that the American populace is generally uninformed when it comes to a lot of the political issues that are relevant in the two great houses of Congress, as well as the United States Supreme Court and the executive branch of the government, which is the office of the president and many of the administrative agencies that are run through the office of the president. That being said, so if decency is on the ballot, and I guess you have to define decency, like, I don't know if people saw the confirmation hearings of Supreme Court Justice Jackson. And the question was asked about women. And she's a woman. Of course, there's the issue of gender and multiple genders. And men, well, I don't think that. Men having babies, drag queens, and giving friendly activities to children. There was a huge issue with the Department of Justice coming under scrutiny for its targeting of parents. The Department of Justice would say that, no, we didn't do that. But the parents would say, no, clearly you did do that. And obviously there's still some of that that's going on. I believe Senator Ted Cruz as well as Senator Hawley. There was a huge hearing about it, and it's still going on. And there is expected to be hearings after tomorrow's elections to get to the bottom of those issues. So when you say decency and truth, and you say, well, it's gas on the ballot, most people would say in the United States of America, 81% of the population believes that economic issues are at the forefront of tomorrow's elections. So the former President Obama, and I actually do want to touch on a little bit of that. I don't know how every single colored, black, dark-skinned person feels about President Obama. What I can say is that I have discussions, and when it comes to black, colored, brown, African American blacks in society, and their reality versus their feelings, there is a divide there. For many years, blacks have been maltreated in the United States of America. That's not up for debate. That's a fact. And when I say that in a general term. I don't mean individual, because we know that there have been successes and there have been people that have had their fortunes, and their stars changed. But we're talking about the overall perspective of the black community within America. And then there was, of course, obviously the election of a black president, not once, but just twice. However, that being said, the divide comes as a black president being in the Oval Office. What has been the outreach or the lasting impact towards people of color, people that look like him? And there is huge divide there in the black community. Did President Obama, what was the ultimate result, and how did that affect black America? And you find this debate, whether it's Professor Cornel West at Yale, or Minister Farrakhan, or Condoleezza. No, I'm not going to say Condoleezza Rice, because I would be wrong in saying that. Or some of the scholarly writings in the community, some of the pro or Pan-African leaders, some of the Hollywood A-listers, all the way down to your mom and pop discussing it in the living room. And so there's that. And then one of the more, how could I say? One of the races that has captured, or specifically is in the forefront of the news, is Stacey Abrams, being a black woman, and I'm gonna get back to that term, woman, and it goes Brian Kemp, and the impact of some of the things that have happened in the last 2 years, particularly, and I like to use that word particularly, specifically, and can we identify? If you recall, when the voter ID laws were being articulated in Georgia, and Stacey Adams, her defense of that was that, this is racist and this is voter suppression. And again, I go back to the concept that some of the laws there are the same laws that are in Delaware, the state of the president, the current president. There's no argument in Delaware that these are suppressive or racist laws. There's no argument of them. And some of these laws resemble laws that are all across the land. Specifically, the voter ID. That's the one I'm touching on. This whole, you have to provide water for people at voting locations. We don't want people falling out. That is not part of the law as far as the Constitution is concerned. I know it's a great thing to do, but it's not part of the Constitution that you have to provide water or you have to provide a means or a vehicle for people to get to elections, even though there are services that are provided for people that have trouble voting. So, but those are issues, specifically this voter ID issue, which came up. And then because of that, Major League Baseball and some of the more powerful sports entities or business entities, I don't know if you understand how things work economically. Atlanta's a big city, and people rely on the income that is generated through the businesses that frequent Atlanta and the events that happen in Atlanta. Well, the All-Star Game left, which crippled businesses because those people were expecting to have that generated income, but because of the stance that, this is Jim Crow, and this is racist, and this is segregation again, those people were affected by it. Now those very same people, particularly the men, candidate Abrams has issues with, they say, they just don't understand. And people understand the bottom line. They understand that they can put food on the table for their family. They understand that they have a job. They understand that they can put clothes on their back. And so when people that are affluent seem to like discard that as it doesn't mean anything, you're out of touch with reality. Because the same way that you got to where you are, you didn't start being a candidate. You started as somebody's daughter in some house where they provided you with sustenance, education, protection, security, and you were able to grow up into the person that you be. But now to discard the effect of some of your decisions and your rhetoric, how it impacts them and their families, that's cruel, right? That's a little insensitive. And so when you say that decency on the ballot, I would say that's indecent. Because you just tell people, oh, it's about democracy. Well, they have the right to exercise their democratic choice. They can choose to vote for you, or they can choose to vote for somebody else. That is, in essence, democracy. Now, of course, we are a democratic republic, which is a whole other issue for those that are into government. And it's another one of the reasons I say it to the public. In general, we are uninformed or misinformed, as Denzel Washington would say. But that's on the ballot. Economic issues are truly on the ballot. How people can afford to provide for their families. That is a real time issue for people, as they say, kitchen table issues, or gas is on the ballot. And these are things that are happening right now. Also, crime. I've watched the news. I know that many people watch the news. I grew up in New York and Miami. And when you see some of the issues that are happening, where people are being attacked in the subway, people are being attacked in the street. And the thing that I find interesting, and it's something that you see a lot, and somebody has to say it, the young people beating up on older people, young people, particularly young black people, beating up on Asians, beating up on whites. I remember telling the president of our college, and also my friend, that, I'm black. I don't want to see my neighbor being hit over the head. Regardless of what has happened in America, for how many years, it doesn't matter. If we're all going to live up and espouse the ideals of each man, or every man is created equal in the eyes of God, why should I be hitting you over the head? And how is me hitting you over your head somehow going to rectify social injustice that I believe have perpetuated me and allowed me, or particularly, specifically, me as an individual, are somehow hindering me from becoming the person that I could become? Hitting you over the head, and watching you bleed, or watching you die does nothing for me. Nothing. And for the people that do that, they need to take a real look at themselves and the way that they think, because that's not helping you. That's actually hindering your cause. It's hindering your cause. So that is a big issue across America. Homelessness is another big issue across America. When we see the streets of San Francisco, at one time we look under the bridges in El Paso and Texas. I grew up in New York again, as I would say, and you saw some of that where people were homeless, and everyone would call, Wino Ed, which he lived in the corner in the box, and he would ask you for $1. These are issues that have been part of society for quite a long time. And then there would be the thought that many people say, I'm on Twitter a lot, how is it that we can't afford to pay Social Security and Medicare for United States citizens, but we can afford to give billions of dollars to Ukraine? Nothing against the people of Ukraine. I pray for them, pray for their plight, pray for the situation there. But if we can afford to give billions and billions and billions of dollars to other countries, but yet there are people that are suffering right here in front of us, and we can walk past them, much like the person that begs for $1 at the store or at the corner light. These are just issues, and we talk about them a lot, unfortunately. So this is stuff that is actually on the ballot. This is what's on the forefront. The other thing that's on we think about in the ballot. So if you're a parent, and I'm not a parent, but if you're a parent and you have a child, in particular in this case, a female child, what has happened to female sports in the last couple of years is a real issue. It's a real issue for parents. It's a real lifetime issue, specifically when you hear of people who identify as a different sex have not had any operation or removal of organs or physical traits, and they're in bathrooms with females, and schools are forcing these females to have to stay in the area with a person that they feel uncomfortable with. There was a time when women, all they have to do is say that I feel uncomfortable, and you could get arrested for that. You could get some serious trouble. But now the very same women who identify as women, that are actually women, when I say women, I mean physiologically and physically, anatomically, a woman, that are now having issues in quote unquote their space. That's on the ballot. And these are parent issues, and parents vote. And so this is another thing that when people say the decency on the ballot, you have to respect the individual households and the families, because families are the fabric of society. That leads to another discussion for another day, that there is some theory about why some of these things have happened and the attack on the family. Well, that's another discussion. That's another discussion. All right, so all of this stuff, like I said, I read Twitter quite a bit, and Twitter's informative. So all of this stuff is there, that's out there, and shoot, in 19 minutes it's gonna be 12 o'clock, and it'll be election day, and people will go out to vote, and they will exercise their democratic right. So I think that that's a good thing. I think that people should be involved in the political process. I don't even know if I have that speech anymore, but I might still have it. And I will tell you why the political process is so important if I could find it. And maybe that would be the way that I close things out tonight, is if I could find the political process. I think it was on a speech that I gave about Constitution Day, and that was in 2020. So I was very fortunate. You can look that up on the Forsyth Tech website and see that discussion or forum. But it really is important for people to understand the power that they have on the local level and also on the national level. But most things that impact you happen on the local level. So I was involved in city council back in North Carolina. I think I'm going to be able to find it. And I tell people this all the time. The people that show up to your city councils or your town councils make the difference in the outlook and the policies that are created that affect you on a daily basis. And the reason I explain this to them is because most people sit back and go, I can't believe that the town is doing this. I can't believe that this happened. I can't believe that they're zoning this. I can't believe that this this bid failed. And I always say the reason that you can't believe that is because you don't go. You don't go. And the people that do get the winning bids, the people that do get laws written that favor them, they are there with their groups, and they are campaigning and they are lobbying for the things that they want. And it makes an impact because the council people, councilmen and women, they hear it and they act on it. It's not complicated. So if you really want to make change on the local level, what I would advise is that you would show up to city councils, whether that be via internet or in person. that you would know who your local magistrates are, that you would know who your local politicians are, that you would know who is on your board of elections, that you would know who's on your board of education. And we're seeing a lot of that happen since 2020, where parents in particular have just said, hey, what's being taught to our kids? Our kids are coming home with some really interesting things, and I want to repeat some of that stuff because that's not who I am. But now you see that, and people are able to make a difference because they see what's being taught, they see what's being initiated, and now they can take a stand against it. And so my advice is that if you really want to change what's going on in your community, then get involved on that level. And now I'm looking for, that's the panel questions. That's the video speech. I think I found it, maybe. Bingo. And so this is why I think that everyone should at least be aware of the political process. And I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go to bed because I have to get up and go to work. But as I've said many times before, that I get on here, I like doing one. No one has to listen. If no one ever listens, that's fine. I do it specifically because I enjoy it. Definitely had some feedback. That's good. But that's why I do it. Hopefully it helps somebody. All right. So I'm going to read and give you a little bit of what I talked about in 2020, which is still impactful. So I don't know if this has ever been attempted in this fashion, but it is an honor for all students participating in person. They're saying that we are two things that you do not talk about: politics and religion. The political process affects us all, and I would dare believe that all of us likewise have some form of religion, whether that be a belief in a higher power or the belief in oneself. Beliefs matter because they affect us. And I think that today is a great illustration of why the political process is so important. It is the discussion or the illumination of what we believe and hold dear that challenges our notions of independence and causes us to act. Voting is an act. Voting is a choice. Voting is the direct response and effect caused by what you believe. Our distinguished panelists, and I was speaking in the past about that, and I would say that goes hand in hand with today's candidates, state their beliefs in open view for all to see. And I cannot imagine that everyone has the courage to do so, because most of us don't want to tell people how we really feel. We don't want to reveal our real thoughts. We don't want people to know who we are. And therefore, it's easy to hide behind someone else's opinion and to say, I don't have to do that, and not put myself out there. So it's not easy standing on the corner and using the loudest horn to get someone to hear an idea, or to warn, or to inform. Life, we know, is filled with the everyday and mundane, which distracts us. We are interesting people as a whole. And I make mention of one comment to Dr. Spriggs in a conversation that if you're the smartest person in the room, you need to leave. And I think we both laughed because she is the one that taught me that. So this process is relevant to discuss because no one is the smartest person in the room. Each of us brings a uniqueness to this thing we call life that only you can bring. Communication, or the expression of ideas, has long been the main source for the advancement of civilization. And if Miss Piang Ling, who was a teacher, a professor, were here today, she would say, people need to talk more and to listen more. In all our cultural climate today, we are faced with the apparent issues from social justice to reform, a little bit I spoke about earlier, to housing and welfare, to poverty and disasters. And though that may not seem related to the political process, it very much is. If your economically disadvantaged school system seems to lack resources, get involved in the political process so that you can process things to the areas of need. And if the issue of how to pay for your child's future education is yours, get involved in the political process. Know your local officials and funds or resources available. And if you think your neighborhood is overrun with crime, as we see, and poverty, or that police brutality is real, get involved. And there were many issues spoken about of recent and current events, and all of those issues involve you. You are part of the political process. You hear about it, you read about it, you discuss it, so think of it as communication. And Representative John Lewis, who's now deceased, said, let's get into some good trouble. We should hold people accountable to what they say before us as the protector by extension of the things that we hold dear. Elected officials are those people. They need our support, but we need theirs too. And if ever there was a time to discuss things, and there's still in that time, now is the time. And our nation is built upon a very simple principle. All men are created equal in the sight of God, and all men should be left free to pursue happiness. Laws should not disenfranchise the very people they were meant to help. The people are the nation, and not the other way around. The political process is about us. It is about the single mom working, trying to earn a degree and change her standard of living and quality of life. It is about the family trying to figure how to pay ever-increasing medical bills and to care for their aged. It is about the youth walking down the street with every intention dream of a way out of the ghetto and no intention of doing anything criminal, but made to fit a societal view that is not his nor his reality. It is about the manufacturer and the worker, the immigrant, the waitress, the nurse, the fireman, the police officer, the educator, and even the prisoner. But most importantly, the political process is about all of those who dare to dream, who dare to believe that they can change their stars. It is these dreams that politicians hold in their hands and can alter a person's life with the stroke of a pen or a nod or a nay. So if today, and we look at this phrase, the political process, from a new vantage point, and that vantage point is the one standing or seated right next to you. President Kennedy once said that he believed that a black man could very well be president in the next 40 years, and he was close in this belief. I like the other thing that he is known for saying, ask not what your country could do for you, but rather what you can do for your country. So again, the challenge, the inspiration, the motivation is a very simple one. Get involved, be involved. So that was something that I spoke about in 2020. I think it's still relevant today. I think tomorrow is going to have a lot of impact on the direction of the country. So we pray for our country. We pray that God's blessing will be upon us. We pray that we make good decisions in our choices for leaders. We pray that we think carefully before we go in to vote. We pray that we vote our conscience. We pray that we will vote our ideals, our morals, and our values. And I believe that the majority of the country has a certain moral background, a certain moral fabric, and I believe that should play out. And we also stand up against all the things that are evil and trifling in the United States, as well as other countries. We realize that we are a model that many people in other countries, particularly Venezuela, Chile, Peru, Honduras, some of the states in Africa, from Nigeria, some states over in the Polynesian, I can't say states, but countries like over in Polynesia. We think about Vietnam, we think about India, places that do not have all of the material provisions that we have as a country, that we have reaped, and we are continuing to reap, and we are blessed, particularly as Christians. This is different from living in China. This is different from living in Africa. This is different from living in Iran. This is different from living in countries where your life is literally at threat when you walk out your door, if you have a door at all to have. So we are truly blessed as people. We should not take it for granted. And I know that we do, and it's something that we need to hold dear. We have these rights. Let's not freely give them away, and let's go out and make a difference. But again, the political process is clearly about you because it affects your life. If you understood how the CFR, the Code of Federal Rules, the Code of Federal Regulations, the administrative agencies in the United States affect you on a daily basis, from the Department of Labor to the Department of Labor to the CDC to the EPA. If you realize how much these organizations and the appointments and the ideology behind the organizations that affect you, you'd realize that you have a difference and you are a voice, and your voice does matter, and you can make a difference, but you have to exercise it. and you have to be involved, and you have to speak up. So that's all I have for you today. I hope that it was informational and inspirational. It's always that, right? That I always say it's informational and inspirational. But I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to get out of here. And so I really appreciate if it did impact you. And again, I enjoy it. So thanks for watching. And everybody have a great night.